Welcome to our first ever 100 Women event. We are delighted that you could join us this evening in small groups all over the U.S. You were handpicked to participate in this event because someone thought that you were influential, a difference maker, a woman with drive and passion, a woman that could make a difference right where she lives. You did not attend tonight's event to listen to me, but to engage in Reese's horrifically beautiful story. Reese is a 40-year-old woman, Bluffton area native, with 11 children by marriage. We are both humbled and grateful for Reese's courage to share her story. It hasn't been an easy process for her, but she believes with full confidence that she is being obedient by telling her story and has already received healing by doing so. This story is not to exploit Reese as some type of marketing ploy or glorify the horrific things that happened to her, but to educate, to encourage, to move people in their thinking. And it is with my utmost pleasure to bring you this story of redemption.
Why do we? My story is horrific. To someone who has never been in an abusive relationship of any kind, my story is going to frustrate you. You are going to want to scream and shake me all at the same time. For others, you're going to sit in silence, without words, knowing exactly how I felt. Because the belief that we deserve better, can find better, is too scary, too overwhelming to even begin to attain. Our character, who we become as a person, begins to take shape before we're even aware of ourselves as individuals. Ideally, we're raised by two loving, healthy parents that tells us about Jesus in a safe home and that starts us out on a pretty good path. Unfortunately, for many of us, that's not the case. I know for me, I had two parents who loved me, but who didn't love themselves very much or each other very well. So even though they cared about me and were present in raising me, I still got caught in the crosshairs of their own wounds and dysfunction. My picture-perfect family was far from perfect. For me, as a child who couldn't control what was happening to her, I was left with confusion and insecurity. I did ask Jesus into my life and did believe he heard my prayers, but I questioned myself and everything else. I learned to blame myself for everything. I turned inward at a very young age. I was more than shy. I was downright anxious and socially awkward. I felt sad most of the time and like I didn't matter. For years, it was easier for me to just make myself disappear and live inside myself. I didn't even understand why I felt that way. I mean, I was just a kid. We moved when I was 9, and I started a new school, made a couple new friends, a fresh start, if you will. Just when I started to feel like I could emerge from my shell, I was molested. It was someone I looked up to and completely trusted. It happened on several occasions over an extended period of time. I never spoke a word of it to anyone until I was 19. I had counselors repeatedly question me and my mother whether I had been sexually abused because I was a classic case for it. I displayed all the signs. I adamantly told them no. I was utterly mortified and ashamed. This just solidified my worthlessness. And believe it or not, I wanted to protect the person who did those things to me. I could not deal with the thought of him getting in trouble. I was such a confused, lost little girl. And then I hit my teen years. A broken little girl headed into becoming a broken young lady. I was about as careless and reckless as a teen can get. After all, who cared? Certainly not me. Up until this point, I felt overlooked and unimportant. I'll be honest, the events that happened during this time are unclear, but I know they included self-harm, hospitalization, and the start of a heavy medication cycle. My prayers were just whispers in a storm. But I did feel God urging me to keep fighting. By 13, I landed myself on probation and was shipped away to a home for juvenile delinquents by the time I was 14. I spent nearly a year in that place. It was awful and lonely, and I cried myself to sleep many nights. I finally shaped up enough to come home when I turned 15, where I was sent to a Christian school in hopes of turning my life around. By now, my life had been shaped up to be nothing short of a disaster. Not long after returning home, I met a boy, a charming, funny, sweet boy, and he really liked me. He showered me with attention and gifts. I felt noticed. He was older than me, 18, so I saw him as wiser too. I was in a whirlwind for months, until one night I wasn't. I was sitting on his bed and went to set the drink I was holding on a shelf, accidentally spilling it. He was instantly enraged and screamed at me to get up. I scrambled across that bed as fast as I could move and stood in the far corner of his room, shocked as my sweet and kind boyfriend hurled object after object at me that had gotten wet on the shelf. That was the beginning of a 2-year relationship full of emotional, sexual, and physical abuse. I became pregnant in that relationship at 16 years old and was threatened that he'd leave me if I didn't have an abortion. When I told him that I would not, he raped me and abused me repeatedly, trying to get me to miscarry, until at 11 weeks I found out I had. I had no idea what love was or wasn't. I thought if you believed in someone and loved them enough, it was enough. It didn't matter if they mistreated you. Love was love. I spent the rest of my sophomore year sad and angry, and after that, I dropped out of the school. I finally broke it off at 17. He begged and cried and promised to get help, and I was just empty. It's hard to believe that at 17, I was already so empty that I had no feeling left, but it was true. After that was a string of unhealthy relationships in which I was used and tossed aside. I dated a couple guys in there who were actually really nice, but I didn't know how to be respected and ended up dumping them. That's partly why my first marriage ended. That and the fact that I was only 19 and pregnant again when we married and had yet to face or deal with any of my past. I suffered another miscarriage during that marriage as well. That and my past haunted me for a few years. It changed who I was, and it ultimately pulled us apart until I felt I was doing him a favor by leaving him so he wouldn't have to deal with me or who I was anymore. But it only got worse. I remarried. I'd met a kind man who devoted all his attention to me. Sound familiar? But shortly after we married, we had a small disagreement about something one evening. He followed me into our bedroom, shut the door, and proceeded to scream at me that he was going to get something straight right now. That I would not ever tell him what to do, and that what he said would be what goes from here on out. Red flag, to say the least. But that's the first I'd ever seen that kind of behavior come from him, and chalked it up to him just having a really bad day. I mean, he never laid a hand on me, so it couldn't be that bad. That was long before I learned all the aspects of abuse, and that it wasn't just physical. I gave him the benefit of the doubt. We had 2 daughters together, but I also ended up suffering a 3rd miscarriage during that marriage. That, along with enduring 4 years of complete control, stalking, and emotional abuse from him, finally made me end it. I was a single mother of 3, in my late 20s, once again completely lost with no direction. I knew in many ways I had put myself there. I blamed myself for nearly everything. I felt like that broken little girl again, so worthless, so unimportant. At that time, I had reconnected with an old friend who was just as broken as me, if not more so. I felt better taking care of him. Aside from caring for my children, I poured all of my energy into him instead of healing myself. I wanted him to feel the worth and love that I never did. I ended up pouring myself into him for nearly 10 years. The problem was I poured every part of myself out until I had nothing left. And he let me. He not only let me, he planned it that way. He manipulated me from our friendship, throughout our relationship, into marriage. As soon as our relationship got serious, he went from poor, helpless victim who needed saving to something entirely different, and it was scary. He would go back and forth between the 2 personalities to whatever benefited him most at the time. A Jekyll and Hyde. With him, I suffered constant verbal, emotional, and physical abuse. I was no longer my own person with him. I had 0 privacy. I could not go anywhere other than work without consequences, not even to see my family. And if I was more than a few minutes late, it meant trouble. I had to keep my head down or turned away from people in public, or I was accused of checking guys out. I was told what to wear. My work hours and everywhere I went and everyone I spoke to were all monitored. and my paycheck went into an account with his name on it that he controlled. Our house and vehicles, all assets, were in his name only. Everything I did and said was criticized and mocked, all of my words twisted. Everything that went wrong was always my fault, even if it was completely his doing. If I upset him while we were in the car, he would drive recklessly, putting us all in danger. If at home, he would destroy property in the house or physically abuse me. He sabotaged every holiday and vacation. I even had to watch my facial expressions and tone of voice around him. I couldn't even breathe wrong, no joke. Through this, I did feel as if God was walking beside me. I begged him to rescue me and my children, but at some point it got too dark, too hard to feel God at all anymore. He was a binge drinker whose temper would flare even worse when he was drunk, and behavior would become totally erratic. Countless times I had to try to stop him from either hurting himself or others while he was drunk because he had zero inhibition. What he wanted, he got. He deserved it, and I didn't, and I was not to dare stand in his way. Why did I stay so long? Why didn't I just leave? Especially after my history with abusive men. A question many abuse victims are asked. Let me tell you, I tried to leave. I tried to walk out that door several times. A couple of times I even had my things packed up ready to go. And that's when the tears and the charm would turn on, and all of the apologies and promises and begging and poor me, nobody loves me victim persona. Total manipulation. And I would crumble. Plus, I'd already failed at 2 marriages. I had to try harder. I had to make it work and see it through. He might change, and I could not allow my kids to go through another broken home. But most of all, I stayed because I lived in complete fear. Sorry. And as I sat in a prison of fear in my last marriage, exhausted in defeat at rock bottom, I cried out to God to help me. And I felt silence, complete and utter silence. I'd never felt as alone as I did then. I'd never felt so much silence. And then came my 4th child. My abuser's actions changed while I was pregnant, and what I saw, I wanted to believe was change. When I was pregnant with her, I had a friend ask me, "What are you going to do if the abuse continues after you have the baby?" And I knew right then and there. I said without hesitation, "I'll leave. I will have to leave." I knew I would do anything to protect my baby, and God knew I would too, and that is what I did. The day she was born, the minute I heard her cry, I suddenly felt the love of God flood and surround me again. She was my answer. She was what saved me. The beginning of the end of a long road. And yet I endured being screamed at to put her down and pay more attention to my husband. He screamed at her to stop crying. But the day came when I had finally had enough. I was holding her and he threw something at her, just barely missing her head. I was forced to protect her from her own father. And in sheer mama bear mode, I wrapped my arms around that child, looked at him in the eyes, and said we were leaving. I had no fear that day. Of course, I was threatened with the house burning down around me and other horrible things if I left, but I knew I had to leave. So I prayed, and God gave me the name of a very distant contact. Her name kept coming to me over and over and over. I thought it was so strange, but I had nothing to lose. So I contacted her, and she helped me file a report with the police. And a week later, I walked out. You see, that child saved my life and freed my daughters. God was silent so that when I was ready to listen, I would hear what he had to tell me. Shame, guilt, oppression, deceit, secrecy, self-loathing, regrets, defeat, mistakes, sin, hatred. The list the enemy speaks into our lives is endless. Unless you look the enemy in the eye and deny his power over you, you will not be able to walk away. I lived trapped in the same cycle for nearly 40 years of my life, until one night, shortly after I walked out, I got face down on the floor before God in full surrender to Him, crying out to Him to break those chains and save me. It was absolutely not until then, until I arose with Jesus' redemptive power, that I was able to make that choice to walk away from my lifelong demons and begin the process to heal. It was not long after that when I met a man of God who respected me and loved me unconditionally, despite my past or present issues. It was then that the Lord was able to bless me with a safe and healthy relationship, and I was able to understand what a true covenant of marriage is meant to be. The struggle is real. This isn't a Hallmark movie. Daily, I slay the dragons of my past, look into the face of the gift that God sent to rescue me, turn to the grace He offers, and fight. I will not surrender to my past cycles like the enemy wants. I don't care where you come from, or what you've done, or what has been done to you. God loves you. All things are possible through Christ, and there is not anything He cannot save you from, or cycle He cannot break. Generational curses can end here. You are worthy and cherished in His eyes. You can walk in freedom. You can break chains and succeed, no matter your background or what your circumstances are right now. There are people who care about you and believe in you and are willing to help you. Allow them to. You are never alone. What you've always done is not what you have to continue to do, to endure, to manage, to live. All you have to do is stand up, face your demons, and walk out of the place you've always stayed, all in the power of Jesus. And if you learn anything from my story, know that it's never too late to change the place you've always been.
So the question is, who are you in this story? Are you Reese, a person stuck in a horrific cycle of some type of abuse? Does someone know? Do you want out? If so, I urge you to use Reese's story as a step forward in freedom and reaching out to someone today to help make that freedom a reality. Or are you the friend that answered or could answer the call for help? I guarantee that when Reese's distant contact answered the phone that day, she had no idea that she was part of a God-sized plan that would lead a woman and her children out of a 10-year abusive relationship. In reality, we all have a piece of Reese's story inside of our own story. We all have allowed something to creep in and take a hold of us where God should have control. We can allow that something to continue to control us and get into the way of the life that God has for us. Or we can do something about it. Do you know what I love most about Reese's story? It is the perfect example of there is no them versus us. By all appearances and matter of fact, Reese's story shouldn't have been written this way. She knew Jesus, she had 2 loving parents, and she lived smack dab in the middle of the Bible Belt. And yet, Helping Hands serves women and their families, period. Unfortunately, Reese's story isn't unique. If you are in a place to be a distant contact and answer the call to help women and their families in our community in a wide variety of circumstances, do it right now. Don't wait until you've got it all figured out. There are other women in our community that are literally your neighbors that need help. I'll leave you with Helping Hands verse of the year. 1 Corinthians 16, 13 through 14 states, "Be on your guard, stand firm in your faith, be courageous, be strong, do everything in love." What, friends, what are you willing to stand and face so that others can be helped?